Imagine that every time a manipulative person tries to dominate you, you don't explode, you don't get into arguments, and you don't feel the need to justify yourself. Instead, you respond with a phrase so clear and so firm that it leaves the other person with nothing left to say. That is exactly what Stoicism can offer you. The ancient sages did not deal with social media or toxic bosses, but they deeply understood how manipulation, guilt, and emotional blackmail operate. In this episode, you will discover 10 Stoic phrases capable of deactivating psychological games without raising your voice, without creating conflict, and without giving up your dignity. These are expressions that allow you to protect your boundaries, maintain your serenity, and make it clear that your mind is no longer available for others to control. If you're exhausted from feeling taken advantage of, guilty, or constantly pressured to say yes, stay until the end and learn how to respond like someone who is truly stoic. If you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to do so and leave your like. That simple gesture helps me tremendously to continue creating content like this. Number 1. I understand what you're saying, but I've already made my decision. Manipulators survive by finding the cracks in your boundaries. They evaluate how far they can go. They test you. They push a little today and a little more tomorrow until they discover that you always end up giving in if they apply enough pressure. That's how you start accepting things you don't want, how you begin feeling guilty every time you set a boundary, and how little by little you lose control of your own life. The first Stoic phrase that silences a manipulator is simple, calm, and absolutely firm. I understand what you're saying, but I've already made my decision. Observe its structure. First, you acknowledge the other person. I understand what you're saying. This deflates any attempt at drama because the manipulator seeks conflict. They want you to argue, to justify yourself, to start proving things. When you show that you listened and understood, you leave no room for them to accuse you of being unfair, distant, or cold. Then comes the part that truly protects your inner peace. But I've already made my decision. This is where the heart of Stoic thought appears. Marcus Aurelius said that the mind is the only territory that truly belongs to you. When you assert your decision with serenity, you are defending that territory. A manipulator will try to respond with arguments, exaggerations, disguised insults, or guilt-driven appeals. So I don't matter to you? Then don't say I didn't warn you. I thought you were different. This is exactly the point where most people abandon their position. The Stoic secret is not to enter the emotional game. You don't need to justify yourself for hours or present an academic explanation for every choice. It's enough to repeat, with the same calm tone, I understand what you're saying, but I've already made my decision. You are like a rock against the waves. The pressure comes, the tone changes, the person tries everything, but you remain firm, without raising your voice, without attacking, without lowering yourself. Epictetus taught that true freedom begins when you can say no without feeling guilty. This phrase represents exactly that, an adult, serene, conscious no. It is not aggression, it's not an attack, it's not revenge, it is pure self-control. Start paying attention. Someone who insists too much after you've been clear is not trying to have a conversation. They're trying to impose themselves. And it is precisely with that type of person that this phrase should become almost a mantra. The more you practice it, the easier it will be to protect your decisions without getting tangled in useless arguments. And over time, manipulators will notice that with you, the emotional game simply stops working. Number 2, you have the right to think that way and I have the right to disagree. Manipulators enjoy turning their opinion into an unquestionable truth. They speak as if what they believe were a universal law. You're exaggerating. That's ridiculous. You have no reason to feel that way. The hidden message behind all of this is always the same. I am right. You are wrong. Therefore, you must surrender. This is where the second Stoic phrase comes into play, cutting that pattern at the root. You have the right to think that way, and I have the right to disagree. Observe carefully what this phrase triggers without needing to raise your voice. First, you validate the other person. You have the right to think that way. You don't start fighting to prove who has the absolute truth. You don't try to correct them, and you don't assume the role of moral guide. This lowers the manipulator's defenses because they can no longer sincerely claim that you're shutting them down or not letting them express themselves. Then comes the part that protects your mental space, the one that is sacred in Stoicism, and I have the right to disagree. Here you calmly establish that the other person's perspective will not be imposed on your life as if it were the only valid one. Marcus Aurelius often reminded us that each person acts according to what they understand as truth. The problem arises when someone tries to impose that truth as a weapon to dominate. And manipulators do exactly that again and again. They use phrases such as, "If you really cared, you would do this." "Everyone knows you're wrong." "You're too sensitive, you should give in." When you respond, "You have the right to think that way, and I have the right to disagree," you place the responsibility back where it belongs, on the other person's opinion, not on your identity. It is very likely that the person will insist with disguised complaints. "So you're saying I'm wrong? You're calling me manipulative. Wow, you've changed a lot." The instinct is often to defend yourself, explain or repair your image. But the Stoic path is not about turning every conversation into a courtroom. You don't need to convince anyone or win the argument. Your goal is not to prove you're right. Your goal is to preserve inner peace. If necessary, repeat calmly, "You can continue believing that, and I will continue not sharing your point of view." Epictetus taught that what upsets us is not events themselves, but the judgments we make about them. When someone tells you, "You're selfish," that is only their interpretation, not a divine command. This Stoic phrase creates a clear dividing line between someone else's judgment and your essence. You are not taking away their right to have an opinion, but you are also not handing over your self-worth to be manipulated. This kind of response deactivates emotional blackmail such as, "If you don't do this, it's because you don't care about me." Instead of falling into the trap, you can respond, "You have the right to interpret it that way, and I have the right to see it differently." That is not coldness, it is emotional maturity. Seneca taught that the wise person is not the one who pleases everyone, but the one who remains whole, even when others do not understand them. You cannot control what others think of you, but you can choose whether you're going to live chasing their approval. Over time, manipulators realize that the famous "I'm right and you must accept it" no longer works with you. You show them through your actions that an opinion is not a chain. This phrase is, quietly, a declaration of inner freedom. The world may be filled with 1,000 voices, but the one who decides what enters your mind is you. Now write in the comments, "I have the right to disagree." That will be your mantra phrase when dealing with manipulators. If you're enjoying the content and value the effort we put in here, then leave your like. Now let's move on to the next response. Number 3, "I don't feel comfortable with this, so I'm not going to do it." Manipulators enjoy pushing you into situations where you feel bad, pressured, or emotionally cornered, yet almost forced to accept. They often use phrases like, "It's just this one time," "You're exaggerating," "Anyone would do this for me," or the classic, "If it were the other way around, I would do it for you." The intention is clear, to make you step over what you feel in order to obey what they want. And this is exactly where the third Stoic phrase comes in, breaking that pattern completely. "I don't feel comfortable with this, so I'm not going to do it." Observe the silent strength of this response. You don't attack, you don't assign blame, you don't give a lecture. You simply express an internal fact. "I don't feel comfortable." The focus is not on accusing the other person, but on acknowledging what is happening inside you. This prevents the conversation from turning into a war about who is right. It's not about proving that the other person is bad, selfish, or manipulative. It's about recognizing that something goes against your values, your boundaries, or your peace, and acting from that place. For Stoicism, your inner world is your true territory. Epictetus stated that no one can force you to make a judgment that goes against your reason. When you say "I don't feel comfortable," You make it clear that you are not going to betray yourself just to satisfy others. And when you add, "So I'm not going to do it," you take responsibility for your decision. It's not drama. It's clarity. It's almost certain that the manipulator will try to twist the situation. "Oh, so I make you uncomfortable? That's strange, it didn't bother you before. Perfect, I understand now that you don't care about me." The most common mistake here is starting to over-explain. No, that's not it. Look what's actually happening. But the more you justify yourself, the more space you give the other person to distort, pressure, or manipulate. The Stoic path is to remain simple and firm. "I understand that you see it that way, but I don't feel comfortable, so I'm not going to do it." This phrase also fits perfectly in more subtle situations. Persistent invitations, favors that cross your boundaries, conversations that invade your privacy, or jokes that feel disrespectful to you. Instead of laughing awkwardly, enduring it, or pretending nothing is happening, you align with what you feel and choose an action consistent with your emotions. Seneca reminded us that the worst form of slavery is living to please others. When you begin to honor your own discomfort, you start breaking those chains. Manipulators lose power the moment they realize that no matter how hard they try, they cannot force you to act against your own conscience. And this is where true respect is born, when you show through your actions that your inner peace is worth more than any external approval. Number 4. If I have to disrespect myself to please you, then the answer is no. Imagine this scene. Someone very close to you looks you straight in the eyes and throws at you the phrase that has caught you off guard so many times. "If you really cared, you would do this for me." On the outside, you force an uncomfortable smile. On the inside, you feel a knot tightening in your chest, an emptiness settling in your throat, and a painful question rising within you. Why am I always the one who has to hurt myself so everyone else can be fine? Except me. That is not love. It is not support. It is not companionship. Most of the time, it is emotional manipulation disguised as affection. Observe the weight of this Stoic phrase. It establishes a powerful condition. In order for me to say yes, I also need to respect myself. Any request that demands you betray yourself, humiliate yourself, break your boundaries, or ignore your conscience already carries the answer printed in advance. No. And it's not an aggressive, vengeful, or resentful no. It is a serene, thoughtful no, grounded in an internal principle. The Stoics insisted deeply on the idea of inner dignity. Marcus Aurelius spoke about avoiding any action that makes you feel ashamed when you look inside yourself. When someone tries to push you into a situation you know violates your values, the Stoic question is very clear. Am I acting according to my rational nature, or am I selling myself for a little approval? The phrase, "if I have to disrespect myself to please you," is the modern version of that moral filter. Manipulators will try to flip the situation. "Seriously? I ask you one thing and now you say you're disrespecting yourself? You're dramatizing, it's not that big of a deal." How interesting, because when it comes to you, I always give in. The trap is trying to justify yourself and prove that you're not exaggerating. Don't fall into that. You don't need to convince anyone that you're disrespecting yourself. It is enough that you recognize it. The criteria are internal. Seneca reminded us that no one can be genuinely good if they live in conflict with themselves. Every time you betray yourself to please someone else, you plant a seed of resentment toward your own soul. When you respond firmly, "I understand this is important to you, but if I have to disrespect myself to please you," then the answer is no. You draw an incredibly clear line. Here is where what is healthy ends. Beyond this begins the abandonment of oneself. And a Stoic does not negotiate their integrity in exchange for crumbs of approval. With time, this posture not only transforms the way others treat you, but, above all, changes the way you see yourself. You stop being the person who always gives in, always stays quiet, always tolerates, and you begin to become someone who would rather lose the approval of a few than lose respect for themselves. And that, for a true Stoic, is one of the greatest victories that exist. Number 5. I'm not going to continue this conversation in that tone. Are you crazy? How could you even think of doing that? You always think about yourself. The voice rises, the face tightens, and within seconds the words stop addressing the real issue and begin turning into attacks aimed directly at you. The discussion stops being about the actual problem and becomes an attempt to make you feel inferior, guilty, or cornered. And it is precisely at that moment when many people fall into the trap. They enter the game, respond with the same level of aggression, try to win the fight and end up exhausted, guilty, and worst of all, giving in just to make the conflict stop. I'm not going to continue this conversation in that tone. Look at what this phrase accomplishes. You don't insult, you don't disqualify, you don't return the aggression. You simply point out a fact, the tone the conversation is taking. You're not saying you're toxic, you're aggressive, or you're a manipulator. You're simply setting a boundary. In that tone, you do not participate. This is profoundly Stoic because it focuses on the only thing truly under your control, your behavior and your decision to participate or not. You cannot control the other person's reaction, but you can choose when you enter and when you exit the interaction. Manipulators use tone as a weapon. They shout, interrupt, exaggerate, play the victim, whine, throw sarcasm, anything to knock you off balance because a shaken mind makes decisions that are far easier to manipulate. Marcus Aurelius said that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When you calmly affirm, I'm not going to continue this conversation in that tone, you are protecting the color of your spirit. You are making it clear, I can talk to you, but my peace is not for sale. Of course, the person may respond with mockery or irony. Oh, now you think you're so enlightened. Right, you never want to talk about anything. Perfect, now you're the one who's always right. The natural impulse is to explain, defend yourself, prove that you're not acting wrongly, but that only drags you back into the mud. The Stoic alternative is to respond with something simple and direct. When the tone comes down, we can talk, okay? And if the attack continues, you end the interaction. You leave the room, end the call, or close the topic. You're not avoiding the conflict. You're simply refusing to participate in an abusive dynamic. Epictetus taught that no one can provoke you without your consent, because provocation is only completed when you give away your reaction. This phrase is precisely the moment when you withdraw that permission. You're not rejecting the conversation. You're rejecting the shouting, the mockery, the humiliation, and the chaos. Over time, the people who live or interact with you begin to understand something fundamental. To speak with you, there must be a minimum level of respect. If not, there is no access. And that's when the game changes. You stop being the easy target of emotional explosions and become the firm presence in the room. Not because you shout louder, but because you know exactly when to say calmly, "Not like this, I won't continue." Number 6. This is important to you, but this is a decision I'm going to make on my own. Before diving into this phrase, imagine a very common scene. Someone surrounds you with arguments, sad stories, dramatic comparisons, and pressure disguised as concern. The person insists that they only want what's best for you. Yet curiously, what's best for you always happens to coincide exactly with what they want you to do. They give you advice that is actually disguised orders, and if you don't follow them, theatrical disappointment appears, emotional blackmail emerges, and the classic line surfaces, "You're going to regret it." Here, the issue is not what decision you are making, work, relationships, money, studies, but who is holding the steering wheel of your life. The Stoics repeated that rational choice is the heart of our freedom. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that no one can decide for you anything that affects your own soul. Translated into our time, from that idea comes the 6th phrase, "This is important to you, but this is a decision I'm going to make on my own." Do you notice the movement? Instead of clashing head-on, you acknowledge, this is important to you. You don't discredit the other person, you don't mock them, and you don't enter an endless argument battle. You show them that you listened, then immediately recenter yourself. This is a decision I'm going to make on my own. And that is where the manipulator loses stability, because their strategy depends precisely on occupying that space, the space of your choice. This phrase is ideal for controlling family members, bosses who feel they own your life, partners who comment on everything as if they were your guardians or supervisors. It is especially powerful when the other person tries to place you in an infantilized position, as if you were incapable of knowing what is best for you. By responding this way, you are not saying, "I don't care about your opinion." What you're really expressing is, "I take it into account, but the final word is mine." Some will react with sarcasm, repeating the same lines as always. "Of course, the owner of the truth. Just don't come crying to me later." Amazing how much you've changed. And it is precisely here where the true Stoic spirit appears. Instead of justifying yourself, you keep the line firm and calm. "I heard what you told me. Even so, this decision is mine." Seneca taught that no one reaches wisdom by outsourcing their own judgment. Will you make mistakes sometimes? Yes. Will you get it right too? Absolutely. But in both cases, you grow, because you were the one who chose. Living under manipulation is far more dangerous than making a wrong decision. It means never discovering who you truly are, because your choices always come filtered, molded, and trimmed by the will of others. This phrase also works as an internal reminder. When you catch yourself seeking everyone's approval before deciding, stop and repeat mentally. "I can listen to what others think, but the final decision is mine." That is a manipulator's biggest fear, losing access to your control button. When they realize you can listen but no longer obey automatically, their power weakens. And yours, quietly and deeply, begins to grow. Number 7. I am responsible for what I do, not for what you feel. A manipulator's most effective weapon is usually not yelling. It's guilt. They don't just express disagreement. They make you feel as if you're a bad person for making a decision that doesn't benefit them. Suddenly, your choice becomes selfishness, your need seems like an exaggeration, and your boundary gets interpreted as disappointment. And without realizing it, you start living through that filter, constantly calculating how others are going to feel and completely forgetting what is aligned with your own values. This is where Stoicism enters like a clean cut through emotional confusion. The ancient Stoics didn't use modern terms like gaslighting or emotional blackmail, but they understood these dynamics perfectly. The other person tries to place inside your mind something that actually belongs to them. That's why this phrase is so powerful. I am responsible for what I do, not for what you feel. This is not a shield of coldness, but a healthy adjustment of boundaries. You take responsibility for what is yours. My actions are mine. If I acted disrespectfully, if I was unfair or inconsistent, it is my responsibility to face the consequences. But what you don't do is carry everything else: manipulated tears, fabricated drama, or twisted interpretations. For a Stoic, there is a very clear line between what is under your control, your decisions, your actions, your principles, and what is not: the internal emotions of the other person. Epictetus taught that each person is the guardian of their own opinions and their own emotional states. So when someone tells you, "If you don't come, I'm going to feel awful," they are not opening a dialogue. They are attempting to hand you responsibility for their emotional emptiness. The Stoic phrase returns that package, which never belonged to you, without aggression. I understand this may upset you, but I am responsible for what I do, not for what you feel. Notice how the dynamic changes. Instead of falling into an endless race of explanations, justifications, and demonstrations of affection, "Can't you be more empathetic? Can't you understand me too?" You stop living permanently in the defendant's seat. You are not denying what the other person feels. You are simply refusing to be controlled by their emotions. Marcus Aurelius repeated a powerful idea. Nothing destroys you faster than surrendering your soul to someone else's judgment. Many people will see this as harshness, especially those who have always had you available, ready to give in just so no one feels uncomfortable. Some will call you cold, others will call you selfish. But in reality, This phrase marks the beginning of something we should have learned long ago: emotional maturity. It is not about taking responsibility for everything. It is about taking responsibility only for what truly belongs to you. Over time, you will notice a strange kind of relief. The world will continue to be full of expectations, demands, and drama, but the weight on your shoulders will be lighter. You will begin to make decisions based on what is right, not out of fear of seeing someone play the victim. And it is precisely there where the Stoic spirit flourishes, when you choose to live according to your conscience and not as a hostage to the feelings that others decide to cultivate. Number 8. I prefer honest silence over a forced agreement. There are manipulators who cannot tolerate the possibility that you won't give in. If you disagree, they pressure you. If you show doubt, they increase the intensity. If you try to clarify your thoughts, they twist your words. Deep down, this person doesn't want dialogue. What they want is surrender. They don't seek a genuine agreement. They just want to hear a yes that makes them feel in control. That's where the 8th Stoic phrase comes in. I prefer honest silence over a forced agreement. Observe how this statement works on several levels. First, it exposes the entire game. When you say this, you're making it clear that you are not going to pretend to agree just to avoid conflict. Stoic philosophy values integrity far more than momentary comfort. Seneca essentially said that nothing is more destructive than betraying your conscience just to please others. A forced agreement is exactly that. Outwardly, you shake hands, but inside you know you gave away something you didn't want to lose. Second, this phrase strips the manipulator of their favorite stage, emotional confusion. Instead of entering endless explanations, you lay out two simple paths. Either we find a real agreement, or we accept an honest silence. None of those vague lines like, fine, do whatever you want. It's okay, it doesn't matter. I'll think about it later. That ambiguous territory is the ideal habitat for manipulation to continue growing. Third, it protects you from a very common trap: the need to close the conversation at any cost. How many times have you said, fine, I'll do it, just so this ends? The problem is that the bill arrives later: resentment, exhaustion, and the feeling that you always abandon yourself. When you choose honest silence, you accept that the other person may end up angry, confused, or frustrated, but you are not selling your inner peace in exchange for a few minutes of superficial relief. In practice, this phrase may sound like, look, I don't agree with this. We can talk calmly and see if we can find something that works for both of us. But if the only option is for me to give in against what I believe, I prefer honest silence over a forced agreement. The other person may respond, so you're not going to talk to me anymore? Seriously, all this over a small detail? You're exaggerating. And that is where you show that you are not acting to impress anyone. You reduce your exposure, stop trying to convince, and do not enter combat. It's not punishment, it's protection. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself that, many times, the best argument is simply stepping away from whatever distances you from virtue. And this phrase is a powerful reminder. Not all peace is real peace. There is a kind of peace that is nothing but fear in disguise. And there are agreements that are not agreements. They are submission dressed up as harmony. A Stoic prefers the apparent coldness of sincere silence over the false closeness of a yes extracted through pressure. When you begin living like this, something inside you shifts. You stop being the person who always gives in to avoid conflict and become someone who accepts temporary discomfort in the name of a more dignified relationship with yourself and with others. And in front of a manipulator, this is like taking the weapon out of their hands. If they cannot force you to agree, the game loses its charm. Number 9. I know what I lived, and I'm not going to doubt myself just because you say otherwise. A skilled manipulator doesn't need to shout constantly. Often all they do is plant doubts inside you. You leave the conversation confused, asking yourself, maybe I exaggerated, maybe I imagined something, maybe I'm actually the problem. The person changes facts, alters details, reverses entire situations, and speaks with such confidence that, little by little, you begin to feel that your memory, your emotions, and your perception are not reliable. Today we know this as gaslighting. The Stoics didn't have that term, but they understood the enormous risk of handing your own judgment over to someone else. That's why this phrase is so powerful. I know what I lived, and I'm not going to doubt myself just because you say otherwise. Do you see the difference? Instead of trying to convince the other person that they're wrong, you reaffirm your own inner truth. You don't enter the game of proving every detail. You don't turn the conversation into a courtroom where you must present evidence, screenshots, audio clips, or witnesses. The phrase works as an internal reminder. Your experience is valid even if the other person tries to erase it or rewrite it. Imagine the scene. You point out disrespectful behavior and hear something like, "Oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. You misunderstood everything." That's strange. No one has ever told me that. Instead of shrinking and falling into the classic, "Maybe I am exaggerating," you take a deep breath and respond calmly, "I know what I felt in that moment. I know what I lived, and I'm not going to doubt myself just because you see it differently." That is profoundly Stoic. Epictetus taught that our power lies in our judgment. When someone tries to rewrite your reality, they are trying to steal exactly that: your ability to interpret events through your reason and your inner honesty. If you hand over that power, you become a moldable tool. But if you protect it, you begin breaking the cycle of manipulation. Of course, the manipulator may respond with mockery. "Oh, the dramatic one. Oh, now you think you're perfect? There's no way to talk to you like this." They do it because they sense they've lost control of what they want most: your mind. Do not respond with the same poison. You don't need to justify your position or turn the conversation into a war of contradictory memories. Repeat calmly what really matters: "I know what I lived." Over time, this stance rebuilds something you may not have realized you had lost: confidence in yourself. You begin to take your perception seriously, your inner signals, your intuition, and your limits. And when you respect yourself at that level, it becomes much harder for someone to convince you that the sky isn't blue just because it benefits them in that moment. This phrase is a silent pact with yourself. I can listen to your version, but the one who decides what to believe about my life is me. Number 10, I can forgive you, but I'm no longer going to give you the same access to my life. In any relationship with a manipulative person, there comes a point where the real question is no longer who is right or how to communicate better. The real question is, should this person continue to have so much access to my life? That is where many people freeze, because the manipulator knows exactly how to play with two heavy cards: guilt and forgiveness. They promise they will change. They swear it was only that one time. They tell you you're exaggerating. They insist everything will be different. And you, afraid of seeming harsh or unforgiving, open the door again. Here appears the final phrase, the one that closes this cycle and marks your stance as a true Stoic. I can forgive you, but I'm no longer going to give you the same access to my life. Do you see what it accomplishes? It separates two concepts that are almost always confused: forgiveness and full reconciliation. Forgiveness is internal. It's yours. It means releasing the burden, letting go of hatred, resentment, or the desire for revenge. And that is deeply aligned with Stoic philosophy. It makes no sense to let the past steal your peace. But access is a completely different story. Access is who enters your life, who stays, who has a voice in your decisions, who knows your secrets, who influences your mood, and who shapes your sense of self. When you say, I can forgive you, but I'm no longer going to give you the same access to my life, you are sending a clear message. I'm not going to live tied to what happened, but I'm also not going to pretend it didn't happen. Manipulators hate this phrase because their strategy depends on the opposite. They fail, they cry, they promise, they move you emotionally, and they expect to regain exactly the same place as before, untouched, as if they never crossed your boundaries. For them, forgiveness means everything goes back to normal, with the same power and the same freedom to repeat the pattern. This phrase completely breaks that cycle. You don't need an endless speech. Sometimes something like this is enough. I don't hold resentment anymore. I truly wish you the best. but your behavior showed me that you're not someone I can keep that close. So I'm moving forward without hatred, just with more caution. That is not coldness. It is clarity. The Stoics spoke often about choosing your company wisely, because your environment shapes your character. Distancing yourself doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone responsible for the influences you allow into your mind, your emotional state, and your self-esteem. The other person may try the usual emotional blackmail, so that's your version of forgiveness? If you had really moved on, you'd act normal. You're stuck in the past. But you know the truth. Being stuck in the past is repeating the same story while hoping for a different ending. Stoic forgiveness is not going back into the cage. It is leaving it without carrying a single chain. In the end, all the phrases in this episode point to the same thing: reclaiming control over the only things that have always belonged to you, your mind, your decisions, and the direction of your life. And sometimes the wisest choice a Stoic can make is exactly this: release resentment while also closing the door that you once left far too open. If you made it to the end, write in the comments, "Today I choose to let go." Let that be your phrase for living better. Let go, free of grudges and free of toxic people. If this episode was valuable to you, leave a like and join our Stoic community by subscribing to the channel. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments. Never forget, we are growing together, every single one of us. Thank you, and until next time.